Hi, it's Mo Bunnell. I'm your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I and my teams have trained over 15,000 experts all over the world on sound, efficient, and authentic business development techniques. And I'm joined today by Kareem Neddy. Kareem's CEO of Herman International. They own the thinking style assessment called the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, and I think it's fantastic. In this interview, Kareem and I go back and forth on how you can use cognitive diversity to grow your book of business, grow your relationships, and grow your career. So before we get into it, know that if you want our best tips on how you can do those same three things, growing your book of business, your relationships, and your career, head over to growbigplaybook.com. That's growbigplaybook.com. You'll get an instant download, and I write a personal little short email every single week, little article on what you can do to have more success with your client relationship outreach and with your broader business development techniques. So growbigplaybook.com is where you get that. So without further ado, here is Kareem Neddy. Hey everybody, it's Mo. You already know that I'm with Kareem Neddy, and I'm really excited to have him on the show because we've collaborated for years. So Kareem, let's get right into it since people already know you. What's your big idea on how people can grow their book of business, grow their relationships, and grow their career?
Well, ultimately, I think the big idea that we have, and something you know very well, Mo, is this notion of cognitive diversity. Harnessing cognitive diversity, which is really another way of saying the differences in the way that we think to build more effective relationships, to build a more effective career, and to ultimately grow your book of business can really help there.
Yeah, we'll go deeper.
I mean, it sounds pretty obvious when you say it out loud, right? Different people think differently, right? But it's something that actually in the day-to-day sort of work environment probably doesn't get the credence that it's due. And what we've seen is that the most effective leaders and the most effective business developers as well are able to harness those differences in thought, that cognitive diversity, for maximum effect. Because the reality is every organization, every team has diversity of thought. I mean, every individual even has diversity of thought, right? We all have different sort of neural pathways that shift over time and that create kind of different thought processes in our minds. But again, those kind of teams, those organizations, most people don't know how to manage that cognitive diversity in a way to sort of overcome some of the perils, some of the the cognitive biases that we all face and struggle with sometimes, the perils of groupthink or conflict, right? We innately sort of default and seek out people who think like us because that's kind of the neural path of least resistance, right? So the best organizations, the best teams, the best leaders know how to sort of break out of that familiarity bias and really tap in to the differences that exist, those really powerful differences that exist in the way that we think.
Yeah, so let's add some value to our audience because, gosh, I'm such a fan of everybody knows you're CEO of the Herman International, and you own the intellectual property around the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, HBDI. And you obviously, I'm a big fan of it because we use it in all our courses and things like that. And we've been partners for a long time. And I absolutely love working with you and the team at Herman. So let's actually go deeper. So why don't you give our audience your version, how you describe it? I think this will be interesting because I know how I describe it and our teams describe it. But describe the HBDI, describe the four major ways of thinking cognitively, and then I guess if you do that, then we can go a little bit deeper around developing books of business and deepening relationships and growing careers and things like that.
Well, I mean, the brain is an amazingly intricate, complicated organ, right? Billions of interconnected neurons, and realistically, we are only still scratching the surface of understanding its true potential. But one of the things that we've really learned over the past couple of decades is that there are these sort of cognitive modes, these systems, right, that are ingrained paths that help dictate the way that we think, right? And you can think of, those as a couple of different spectrums in terms of, more intuitive and divergent thoughts versus more kind of rational and convergent thought. Another spectrum between sort of more cerebral or intellectual type of thinking versus more instinctive gut feel sort of thinking, right? And so those spectrums ultimately come together again because the brain is whole and interconnected you can kind of look at the combinations of those different modes of thinking in terms of a number of different systems that ultimately really bear out a lot of the differences between how one person thinks and another person thinks. And so those four key systems that we measure, the four sort of scales of the whole brain model and the HBDI that you mentioned, are first analytical thought. So this is the kind of mathematical, quantitative, logical type of thinking. Then there's structural thought, which is also known as temporosequential thought in some of the cognitive science circles. That's more process and detail oriented. There's relational thought, the third one, which we call the C quadrant. It's characterized by the red color, which is more interpersonal, social, emotional. And then last but not least, certainly I think given our shared preferences there, Mo, there's experimental thought, sort of that holistic, synthesizing, big picture view. And the reality is that we all have all four of those different ways of thinking within our brains. We all have those pathways, right? And everyone has access to each of them. But over time, through both nature and nurture, we develop these sort of preferences, these cognitive preferences that become our sort of default way of thinking. And we stick to those pretty tightly. We often find it a struggle to kind of stretch beyond those, and that's where a lot of the trouble can come in. Is that sometimes if we only think about things in one way, we lose a lot of the opportunity, and that's true as much in business development as anywhere else.
It sure is, and we've had, I don't know, 15 or 20,000 or whatever people take the HBDI as part of our program. So I've just seen it over and over again. How eye-opening this is to people. I think we all recognize when we just click with somebody or when we don't click with somebody, but people don't necessarily have this really simple framework. So those four ways of thinking: analytical, structure, relational, experimental, like you laid out. When you meet somebody and they're sort of think the same way you do, you just click. And Kareem, I'll tell a funny story that you may remember. When we met the first time, you met in our office in Midtown Atlanta. You came in, you had like a purple sport coat on. Do you remember this? It was like a velour like sport coat. It was very experimental, just even the way you're dressed. And you walked in, I'm like, and you gave me this huge hug. We've never met before. Very relational, right? And I just I immediately thought, I like this guy. This is going to be fun. Like, I was probably running 1,000 directions. We were going to meet because you were coming into town or whatever. And in just a few seconds, my gut feel was, or my intuition was like, I'm going to like this guy. And it turned out to be true. I did like this guy. I do like you. So
thank you, Mo. Thank you. The feeling is mutual, obviously. And just a quick explanation on the purple sport coat. Because colors have so much meaning in our business, I kind of have to choose colors that are neutral, right? It can't be blue or yellow or red or green. I got to go with the pinks and the purples, and unfortunately for everyone involved, the oranges, because those don't have some sort of meaning. I'm not wearing my thinking on my sleeve.
That is really funny. I didn't know that. So I just thought you were bold, man. I just thought you had big ideas.
Well, that's true. You can keep thinking that, though. No problem.
But it's true. You do. This is so funny. Yeah. And so for everybody listening or watching, the HBDI has color coding to make it super easy to remember and letter coding to remember. So analytical is blue or quadrant A, structure is green or quadrant B, relational is red or quadrant C, experimental is yellow or quadrant D. So that's where the colors come in. So do this for me. Let's go deeper, Kareem. I want to go a smidge deeper in this episode before we sort of wrap things up and go to our next one. But tell me about your view. I want to hear your personal view on this. Why do we really connect when people naturally think in our quadrants? And when are things not connective? Like where are the potential downfalls in the model? Or not downfalls, but where the trouble spots between, say, pairs of quadrants? So give me your 2 cents on those two.
Yeah, well, I mean, we connect, or sometimes think we connect, right? On areas of preference, of alignment. It's sort of a natural. Again, it's kind of that path of least resistance to some degree for our brains. Our brains are always trying to save energy, right? And so they're looking for those heuristics. And when you see that match in somebody, right, it increases the comfort level. You start to your ideas start flowing, and you start to connect on that side. But as you say, when there's mismatch, or when there's maybe an incorrect assumption, then that can lead to some significant rub. That can lead to some friction. So, we see that a lot in terms of these sort of diametrically opposed quadrants in our model. Those analytical thinkers who can be very, very focused on the facts, on the data, on what can sort of objectively be seen in the world, can often feel a strong conflict with those more relational thinkers who are, sensing and really picking up on cues that may not be quite as tangible, but ultimately play an important role in a lot of aspects of communication and interaction, right? And so, a way of thinking about this in organizational terms is, you kind of have IT on one side, right, who are often more of those analytical and in some cases structured thinkers. And on the other side, you have, let's say, client-facing team members, right? And there's often this sort of tension between what IT wants and privacy and security concerns and all of those things, right? And on the other side, what's best for the client and what's ultimately going to make people happiest, right? And so you have that kind of rub, that conflict between the two. And you have the same thing between the sort of experimental mindset and that's more structural safekeeping mindset, right? The experimental mindset wants to try new things. They want to wear purple velour jackets. They want to, kind of go and seek novelty and difference. And they're always kind of scanning for, sort of things that are divergent from the norm, from the existing patterns. And on the other side, that structural thinker is, really appreciating the norms and what has worked in the past, and the safekeeping, the lack of risk in going with the tried and true, right? And so again, those can kind of create a bit of tension in an organizational setting and certainly in a relationship setting. And so, as you think about this in the context of business development, knowing those differences obviously can be hugely powerful, right? If you know that someone's going to be coming at this with a very risk-averse mindset, then you probably want to, tamper down the crazy idea discussion, spend a little bit less time on that in the agenda, and spend a lot more time on really helping them understand the plan, the process, how it's going to all work.
Man, I love it.
And ultimately, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, and then you can follow up, is being able to read these clues is really powerful. And listeners and viewers, we're going to cover that in another episode, just one or two away. So be sure you watch the next ones because I want to get Kareem's personal viewpoint on this stuff. But one thing I was just going to say to wrap it up is what's really cool about that tension you're talking about is if we don't harness it, it can rip people apart. Our clients, internal colleagues, things like that. But if we do harness it, that tension leads to better results when you can see both sides. So give me your thoughts on that, and then we'll wrap things up.
Well, that's it, right? That's the whole notion of cognitive diversity and being able to tap into that, right? We've long worked with BlackRock, which is one of the world's largest asset managers, and the co-founder, chairman, and CEO, Larry Fink, is known as kind of being one of the most influential voices in business, right? In part because BlackRock owns the largest share of probably all publicly traded companies. But, Larry says the most important component of good management, good leadership, and good stewardship is making sure that you have diversity of mind. And that's really born out of his own experience. I mean, he comes from a, long-term finance background. You'd think kind of analytical, that sort of blue finance sort of mindset, but he actually comes at it from a very different perspective, a very relational perspective, and is actually, has had an amazing career in bringing that unique viewpoint to organization, to a industry that's otherwise dominated by another way of thinking, right? And his ability to not just bring that unique viewpoint himself, but really harness that within his organization, I know he feels is a big part of the success of BlackRock. And, in my experience, people like Larry, who have the biggest impact, are really able to tap into those perspectives and effectively see things that others can't, right? They're able to pull in those kind of viewpoints to see around corners, and that takes some practice. As you know from the statistics in our kind of millions of profiles, about 3% of us have an equal balance of thinking across the different systems that we measure, and the rest of us just need to get comfortable with stretching beyond our default sort of modes, heuristics, and biases, because you got to be agile when the situation requires it. It's like Charles Schultz said, life is like a 10-speed bicycle. We all have gears that we don't use, right? And those kind of thinking patterns get more ingrained over time, like a well-trodden path in this forest. And Of course, you can take another course through the trees. There may be a little bit of undergrowth, or sort of a few bushes that you need to clear out of the way, but ultimately we can all do that. It just takes that stretching to tap into the brain's kind of natural neuroplasticity, and building their comfort with sort of flexing those different cognitive muscles.
Kareem, that was a perfect wrap to this episode. So people are going to want more of you. They're going to want more of Herman International. Where should they go?
So, well, I mean, as we've mentioned, Mo is a deep valued partner. We've worked together for many years, and has access to all these great tools. So my first stop in my journey would be to talk to Mo, especially if you're looking to up your business development game. But then if you're kind of interested in this broader notion of cognitive diversity, we've also set up a little landing page where you can get access to some free resources that I've mentioned, and we'll talk about in subsequent episodes. That's thinkherman.com/Mo. Herman spelled 2 R's, 2 N's, HERRMANN/Mo, M-O, no need for the E.
That's right, the E. There's no need for the E, people. If you know a Mo without an E, talk to him. You don't need the E. It's sitting out there doing nothing. It's silent. All right, so I love that. And folks, if you want our perspective on this BD stuff, then you can just go to growbigplaybook.com, and sign up for our weekly newsletter. We have an instant download that'll give you the mindsets you need to be successful at business development. So we're going to dig into more things, folks, and we're going to go deeper in a future episode, because there's a couple coming out right after this one. Kareem's going to actually help us decode when we're working with external clients and consultants and people that we work with or whatever. And then internally, how do we decode how other people think? How can we flex? How can we bring in that plasticity that he talked about? So I can't wait about it, or wait for it. So tune in for that. So Kareem, thanks for being on the show. And
My pleasure, Mo. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this has been awesome. All right, thanks everybody.